Thank you for listening today. Please consider liking, sharing, and commenting. It really helps us grow. And now, Jacob's Hammer by Artesia Northe.
The following is a version of a celebrated statement that David Rockefeller, a multi-billionaire, allegedly made in an opening speech at the Bilderberg Conference in Baden-Baden, Germany in June 1991. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during these years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government which will never again know war, but only peace and prosperity for the whole of humanity. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in the past centuries. For those that do not want to believe in conspiracy theories, I suggest that they do not look to the workings of the international banking cabal, because it is a textbook example of what a conspiracy would and should be. Within the confines of the cabal, a subgroup that is a blend of marketing and future trends exist, and it is called the Society of the Just One. This small group of influential world monetary leaders have an unlimited budget and creative imaginations in regards to people and the decisions that they make. Since 1943, the Society has been placing human beings in a variety of situations that require personal and moral determination and societal reasoning. In the end, the experiments help to calculate market trends and future projections as to what people believe and what their moral and monetary values are. In every case, a small wager of $1 encased in crystal is the cherished prize designated for the party who most closely predicts the actual outcome of the social experiment. This prize is highly desirable and sometimes comes at a very high price. Jacob's Hammer. Chapter 1. Sanderson Mitchell was lost in thought. The solitude of the after-midnight hours was a benefit almost equal to the meager pay he earned as custodian of the current 16th floor office space. Since it was day 22 of the recent coronavirus pandemic, the isolation and non-contact of others allowed him to continue to work, but not attend school. He fought back the fear that told him that his current life would be his future, and the world would not be back to normal anytime soon. Every night, with the exception of Saturday and Sunday, the soon-to-be college graduate dutifully emptied trash cans, vacuumed carpet, and dusted office machinery. While cleaning both large washrooms, he contemplated whether men or women were more of a hassle to clean up after, and which left bigger messes in their wake. At this point in his career, men were the worst. As was his custom, when his lunch break came about at 5 o'clock in the morning, the end of his work shift, Mitchell would grab his sack lunch and go sit in his favorite spot at the desk of the big boss. He surmised that Tyler Amesmith must be one powerful guy, because he had the corner office filled with expensive furniture and a view of the city that was unrivaled by anyone else on the floor. The college student placed a cleaning cloth below his feet and plopped them on the credenza positioned behind the desk as he pondered his goals after receiving his accounting degree. With the quarantine barriers in place, delaying school and graduation, he wondered if it would be possible that he could rise to a position of power, responsibility, and prestige similar to what the man who occupied this space in real life. Continuing in thought, the college student custodian pondered the unfairness of his necessary accumulation of college tuition debt and how he was sure that the man of this office surely had an easier road to success than his. Plopping into the comfortable executive chair, he spread his meager lunch on the furniture before him. Keeping to his routine, he enjoyed looking at the city below and then around the room as he ate his hard-boiled egg and peanut butter and jelly sandwich. He'd never met the man who earned this office, but knew that he had weight and power. He was a big shot for sure. One item that always seemed to intrigue him in this nightly ritual was a crystal block that appeared to be some type of award or memento. As he scanned the diplomas on the wall, he was impressed with the degrees from Stanford and Yale, but the most ornate document was titled The Royal Society of the Just One. The gold leaf lettering, along with the bright red and distinctive black, Old English-style presentation prompted him to look up exactly who the society was on his cell phone. Nothing there. Mitchell commented out loud, startling himself in the process. That's weird. You can find out about everything on Google. Nothing listed at all. I wonder who these people are. Lifting the glass memento from its designated place in the sparsely decorated office and absently passing it from hand to hand, the young man failed to hear the elevator announce to all who paid attention that Mr. Amesmith was arriving early for work. In the middle of wondering why this man had this one, single, stupid trophy on display, and deeply lost in thought as to who in blazes the Just One Society was, almost positively some kind of religious cult, no doubt, Mitchell felt his neck hairs rise and the crystal square jump from his hands onto the plush carpet. In the loud and booming voice of a man who regularly made his point clearly, Amesmith was furious. "What are you doing? Who do you think you are?" In a state of panic, the guilty party thought of not only the fumbling drop of the crystal gizmo, which he had no luck in securing, but also of the egg salad sandwich that lay spread out on clear plastic wrap along with an open bag of potato chips and a half of can of orange soda, in all their glory, situated between his back and the face of the bellicose superior. Amesmith found no humor at all in the scrambling maneuvers of the hapless janitor. He only was concerned with the condition of the encased dollar bill. He reached over and picked it up and secured it back to its position of prominence in the center of the office. Sanderson gathered himself, noticed the calm nature of the man who held the crystal block in his hands, and as he cleaned up the rest of his lunch, he took a chance to inquire as to what the item was. The boss man didn't even look at the questioner, as he told him that he just wouldn't understand. "Take your things and leave. Don't do this again, and above all, leave my personal belongings where they are." Amesmith seemed far away from a mental standpoint, but his threatening growl made its point. The executive knew the real story behind the crystal block, as it was told to him at his father's knee. He was struck as to how much the world had changed since his father had won this award, and he was sure that people like the insipid janitor would never be able to conceive or understand the idea behind of its value to humankind. The office cleaner glanced back as he exited, gathering his supplies, and was glad that he completed his work before taking his embarrassing lunch break. He surmised that it was best to leave before he was fired, mentally scolding himself for his carelessness, and considered that his fate could have been much worse. Looking back, he watched the executive seemingly lost in thought as he fondled the crystal memento, gazing over the city in the pre-dawn light, hopefully forgetting his earlier transgression. Amesmith was indeed lost in the memories of the paternal words detailing the award and the evil circumstances pertaining to it. He could still hear the voice of his father, explaining exactly how mankind could be manipulated to do evil so easily. Chapter 2. In January 1933, in mid-March, Adolf Hitler and his National Socialist German Workers' Party established a concentration camp for political prisoners in the Bavarian town of Dachau. Located just outside of Munich, the ethnic repression of the Jewish population started in earnest. By April, some 60,000 were imprisoned, and the brilliant effort of one Hermann Hollerith, an employee of the United States government in the U.S. Census Bureau, was inadvertently the reason they were in peril. Hollerith devised a readable card system that, with standard perforations, designed to designate individual traits like gender, nationality, and occupation, all absolutely efficient ways to identify and control your perceived enemies. Hitler used this technology with efficiency, eventually rounding up everyone on his despicable list of fellow and unworthy German citizens, incarcerating and capturing all in a cold-blooded manner, while cutting-edge technology blindly led the way. The German leader devised a systematic plan to desensitize the populace by starting with criminals being incarcerated in 1937. Raids were organized across Germany, casting nets for any and all persons previously convicted of breaking the law. On the 9th of March 1937, Heinrich Himmler captured over 2,000 people in one night, sending them to the new camps. Prior to the roundup of criminals, in 1935, asocials, such as gypsies, homosexuals, prostitutes, and the homeless, were joined by Jehovah's Witnesses who refused to fight or to meet their military obligations, and as a result, were incarcerated and murdered. In the time period leading up to present time, Jews were designated for forced emigration, and those that remained suffered arrest for the crime of being Jewish. As Germany occupied countries such as Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the Netherlands, a fresh supply of prisoners were added to the incarcerated population in large numbers. Keeping track of all this human inventory was a nightmare for the German administrators, who had a great desire to account and record everything, no matter how minor, dastardly, or cruel. The system of punch card recording kept a record of individual traits such as gender, nationality, and occupation. The millions of punch cards created for the national census were then sorted on the basis of specific information that they contained, allowing a true portrait of the nation and all of its citizens, as well as a qualified baseline on who to go after next. For whatever reason, this critical piece of technology was failing, and in the orderly German mindset, that would not be allowed to continue. Willy Roebel, the former superstar salesman for the National Cash Register Company and current chief executive officer for Die Homag, a German company that shared a mutual admiration with Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime, answered the call for help and assistance. When his friend had a problem, Roebel had an answer and sent his best man to do the adjustments and repairs. Gustav Loeb descended from the large, bulletproof vehicle and followed his briefcase and trunk as it was spirited toward the rough-hewn building known as the administrative office at the Dachau concentration camp. The cold was unbearable to him despite his long coat, gloves, heavy scarf, and a beaver-skinned hat. If he was freezing in the cutting wind, he could only imagine the poor people lined up in a loose formation, none properly dressed or prepared for the frozen exposure. Attempting to not lock eyes on any of the unfortunates before him, he was helpless to avoid the haunting look of the woman standing in the protective gap between the menacing female guard, herself, and her son. Locking eyes, the woman failed to see what was Loeb's full and painful view as the soldier drove the stock of her rifle into the skull of the boy. Intending to strike the mother first, and then the child, the uniformed torturer missed and raised the weapon high to complete the job, and only stopped at the sound of the Swiss camp visitor. "Stop! Do not hurt her!" Gustav looked around and was surprised himself that the voice giving commands was his. The brown-coated antagonist froze with weapon in mid-air, looking in the direction of her commanding officer, who accompanied the young computer repairman into the camp office. The commandant, Oscar Meyer, was slightly embarrassed that his guest was exposed to the reality of the camp environment so soon. Waving the SS guard off of the woman, he silently ordered him to proceed with his normal duties. As the mother wept over her wounded son, the man from Switzerland collected himself and was guided to his original destination, quietly making a vow to keep his eyes downward for the rest of the time on the job, and to never forget the evil look on the face of the heartless female guard. As he entered the main office area, he felt the warmth of the iron stove that sat in the center of the room, slowly being fed small logs by a person who was obviously a prisoner of a different class than the ones standing and freezing outside. In a daze, he recognized the voice of his host, Commandant Meyer. "You must know that you have no authority over me or my staff, Herr Loeb." Meyer scolded. Of course, the slight young man knew that he had no authority. The mixture of authority and understanding in the voice of the German conveyed a message of strict military intolerance. "You are correct, sir. I reacted badly and out of my element. I apologize." Feeling that his point was well taken, and that there would be an unlikely reoccurrence, the senior officer spoke in a measured tone. "Good. We will consider it a one-time incident. No need to report or repeat. I think you will agree?" The young man nodded and indicated that he understood the veiled threat that the man who could cause havoc to his employer and direct supervisor, something that would certainly inhibit his budding career in business, especially a business that was as far-flung and international as his. "Can you have someone show me to my quarters, please?" The commandant motioned for another prisoner to secure the luggage for the young man. "Take Herr Loeb's belongings to the visitor guest room and see that he is comfortable." Turning to his guest, the German officer allowed his voice to be less stern. "After you are settled, we will gather for supper this evening and discuss your project and repair schedule, We are truly less efficient without your machines working properly." With that, Gustav followed the orderly to his quarters, glad to have some privacy to collect his thoughts. Chapter 3. In the early hours of the 19th day of November 1942, the slender woman shielded her young son from the misery that surrounded them, as the cattle trucks transporting 348 other prisoners found every pothole and bump that the country road offered. Each vehicle was packed with unfortunates who were being transported from the SS camp in Danzig, Gdańsk, to Dachau without food, water, fresh air, or sanitation, all in trucks sealed with long nails pounded into the solid wood walls. The journey that took almost 8 days had a toll on the elderly and the sickly. The current death count in her truck was 12, all stacked neatly by the back door, as respectfully as the situation allowed, leaving room for exit in case their journey were to ever end. The boy was very small for his age, and cleaved to his mother for warmth at night and safety during the day. He was frightened enough by his current situation, but was also concerned by the people surrounding him as they spoke in threatening voices to his mother and protector. While their words were not discernible to the boy, his mother was well aware of the nature of the threats as they were conveyed. In the wretched and tiny world that they currently filled, there was never a loss for those who wished to dominate over others, constantly pursuing power even in this evil vacuum of a fearful environment. The frightened mother not only had concern for her immediate well-being, but was trying to avoid being designated as a Musulman. This denotation was assigned to the prisoner who showed the symptoms of a slight cold or a minor limp caused by the rubbing of a toe inside of an ill-fitting shoe, to display an abscess, or one day to appear absent-minded or frail in any way. The prisoners deemed in this category were preyed upon by their fellow denizens, who might qualify as kapos, an elite prisoner who was given favor by their captors with the intent to build a protective wall between the guards and their brutal supervisors. No. To survive, she would have to fight off an enemy who for some reason submitted themselves to the horrible and forced submission on the weak and sickly around them. It disgusted her as she saw her own people, instead of loving and helping each other to survive, instead chose to subjugate the weak and unfortunate. As she held on to her young son tightly, the stench of human waste and the surrounding veil of death seemed to close in on her. She pushed the 2 men off of her as they groped her and seemed intent on smothering her boy. She cried out in desperation and pain, asking her God to stop what was coming against her. The breath that traversed from the mouths of her attackers was as foul as anything she had ever had the disfavor of breathing in her own life. Feeling weak, about to collapse, her last thoughts were of protecting her young boy and feeling so helpless in her efforts. It was at this moment that the cattle truck came to a crashing stop, and the 2 men were violently thrown to the back of the trailer, bouncing off the walls and ending up in the decaying pile of bodies stationed in the rear. As they scrambled to rise from the stack of corpses, they cursed and made their way forward to continue their assault and exact revenge against the terrified woman and her child. It was only the screeching sound of the long nails being removed and the side doors being prepared for opening. Everyone on board found themselves equally subdued in fear and anticipation for what would happen next. Not to disappoint, the SS block leaders raged against guards, creating a frothy and angry scene as they took claws and ripped the gigantic nails from the sides of the cattle boxes. If the boy and his mother were anguished by the actions of fellow prisoners, the beefy, terrifying, and well-fed dominators waged pitiless war on the living cadavers, with faces framed by the revealed wooden cattle pens as the heavier boards were removed in earnest. Of the 350 people who started in Danzig, 293 survived the journey, and when all the living and dead were in the new camp. The sight of bodies stacked like cord wood by the baths burdened even the most battle-hardened souls who had internalized the cruelest and debased things in the performance of their cruel duty. Most turned away in disgust at the sight of the emaciated prisoners standing at attention, scantily clad for hours, only to receive kicks, blows, foul language, and possibly a rifle butt administered at will by an angry guard. The exhausted mother had stood willfully as the last line of defense for her young son, and the depraved keepers cared little for her bravery. The woman guard, snarling face framed against the steel sky, crashed the butt of her rifle down on the head of the young boy. In the middle of the attack, the mother knew that she was going to be pummeled next and placed her arms in a defensive position over her head. Anticipating the blow, she was startled by the unexpected voice of protest, whose youthful face was framed by a large hat and scarf, a face that signaled no desire to harm those that were weak and subdued. A soft face that recoiled in horror at what his eyes were absorbing. It was at this moment of distraction, taking full advantage of the small amount of chaos that was created. She scooped her boy in her arms and was spirited to a nearby shelter where she could lay her wounded son down. In the confusion, the guard hardly noticed the missing woman and her son as he was swarmed by the frightened prisoners as they broke rank and had to be reassigned a spot in the formation. The rescuers motioned the mother to lift her son from the cot and bring him to an area in the back of the barracks where he could be hidden and hopefully recover. As she carried him, others grabbed items to make him more comfortable. As she lay him down, she saw the damage to the side of his face, no blood running at all, just a nasty mark and a peaceful smile as he slept. We do not want the others see that you are in a weakened position. They will take advantage of you and your boy, leading you to death's door, down a shameful path. The concern for her boy was overpowering, but it was important to address her savior. I am thankful for your help. Almost in tears, she paused before speaking again. My name is Irma, and my son is Jacob. We came from Danzig, and we have Muselman there. I do not want to be one of the weak, be beaten and starved, become an outcast to my own people. She had recent and strong memories of how those outcasts were set aside, chosen as useless garbage for the crematorium, the last to eat, shoved, beaten, ill-treated, robbed, and humiliated almost to the point where fellow prisoners and guards wished them to be dead. Irma knew that in camp there was only room for the fit, the quick-witted, and the strong. She would do anything to protect her wounded son, but the odds of success were not very good. Leni placed a hand on the downcast mother. Your son will be hidden, and we as a community of faithful people will help you care for him. With those words, Jacob was secured from the view of the authorities, and the rescue team, along with one worried mother, rejoined the rest of the prisoners in their loose formation in front of the barracks. Chapter 4. Gustav awoke, not entirely sure he had even fallen asleep, and with the absence of a clock anywhere, it mattered not. He did feel rested and a little bit hungry. Gathering his jacket, he left in search of the eating area that the commandant mentioned earlier. As he exited his room, he walked through the clean and sparse hall toward the sounds of a gathering of people on the other end. He was surprised at how loud the conversation level was as he opened the heavy door. It was a quick assumption that alcohol fed to the volume of the various conversations. Herr Loeb, over here the boss said to take care of you. Gustav recognized the voice of one of the men who helped him to settle into his room. He nodded and walked towards him. As he sat at a table with cans of fruit, sardines, and boxes of crackers were open before them, as if part of a celebratory supper. I am Fritz. The commandant told me to look out for you. Welcome, join us please. I want you to meet Hildegard Martha Lechert, and Leda Griese. They also have been given the task of looking after you too. Leda greeted Gustav with a big smile, but Hildy had a look of suspicion, and her voice confirmed it. Gustav, that is a Jew name, is it not? Hildy asked, lighting a cigarette and blowing smoke in his direction. No, my father is Swedish and my mother is Spanish. It is a combination of Gustavo and Gustav. We are not Jewish. It was in this moment that he had a full sense of where he was, and regret filled him regarding his decision to volunteer for this assignment, and now having full realization as to why no one else did. He silently cursed his infernal career ambition. Now you are here to fix us Germans, no? Isn't that right, Loeb? Asked Hildy. Fritz was getting nervous as he knew how mean Hildegard could be to others. He knew that drunken Hildy was worse than the sober side of her personality, especially when she starts calling others by their last name. Hildy, Gustav is here to help us with our punch cards, for you see, our record-keeping machines are not working properly. Fritz had to make an effort to hide the fear in his voice, fully aware of the purpose of the military base he was assigned to. He and most others like him just didn't have the same psychotic fervor that Hildy and her crazy friend Leda had for their job. Trying to change the mood in the room, the burly German soldier stood up and proposed a toast to honor their Swiss guest. Filling small water glasses with clear and potent liquor, absconded from a Der Russ or Russian prisoner as he was being processed earlier that day. Fritz and the other guards favored the duty of processing new prisoners because of the bounty found in their clothing, as they forced subjects to strip unceremoniously, giving up the family heirlooms and trinkets that they thought they could hide after being arrested. Superior officers had little interest in the confiscation of alcohol, but the valuable jewelry that was stolen was another matter. All precious metals confiscated, along with the gold in the teeth of the prisoners, were melted down and used to line the pockets of the officers and the military, as this illicit largesse financed the war effort. Because of her brutal attitude toward the prisoner population, along with her over-the-top discipline and torture levied on those deemed to be the weakest and most physically unfortunate, Hildegard Martha Leckert, because of her viciousness, was given the honor to pick one valuable piece from the monthly accumulated booty. She chose a large Star of David that was ripped from the throat of a formerly wealthy Jewish woman. The evil woman guard taunted that very woman prisoner as she waved her former golden necklace in her face, shot her dead, and for every minute of every day henceforth, taunted all with a hallowed symbol of their faith. Hildy frightened everyone, her superiors, fellow guards, and of course the prison population. However, as long as she was good and effective in her role, everyone tolerated her behavior. In the company of many despot murderers, this psychopath excelled in her chosen role. The Russisch vodka was favored when it came to alcoholic contraband, as the clear liquid was superior in making day-to-day reality disappear. Hildy drank the Russian alcohol with victorious abandon, shoving the large ornament around her neck in the faces of those in her company. Here's a toast to our guest from Switzerland. May he be successful in his mission to fix our information machines. Fritz added the last part as he saw the Commandant Meyer enter in the back of the drab mess hall, doing his best to inject business into their recreational time. The senior officer was wary in his approach, where his maniacal female guard was consuming large water glasses of alcohol. Technically, he could punish her for any insubordination, but the cost would be far-reaching, and he chose to ignore her loud, braggadocios comments. With a shrill, drunken voice, Hildy welcomed the military leader. Der Chef will to our Parte. Smiling, trying his best to be sociable, the commandant couldn't shield his eyes from the sight of his intoxicated female guard, drunkenly draped around the neck of one of the younger guards who were trying to leave the room to perform his stint of guard duty. The man caught the gaze of his commander and pushed the woman guard away with disgust, stood at attention, and proceeded to his duty station. Meyer nodded approvingly, and Hildy was not happy with the rebuke. She grabbed the arm of her compatriot Leda, and both women stumbled out the door. The remaining men were quietly relieved that they were able to speak without confrontation, none of them wondering where the women have gone, just secretly glad that any further embarrassing events left with the two female guards. Gustav whispered to his host, Fritz, that he was tired and wished to return to his room. With good wishes from his new acquaintances, the guest from Switzerland rose to leave and found himself in the company of the camp commander as they both walked toward the exit. Herr Loeb, it is my hope that you are not shaken by the events tonight. We have very difficult work to do here. Emotions that are lubricated by alcohol and mixed with anger can make themselves known at the most inconvenient times. My only hope is that you will focus on the work before you, complete that work, and leave us to complete the tasks placed before us. Loeb could not form the words that occupied his mind and thoughts about the recent interaction with the SS soldiers, specifically Hildy. As far as their tasks placed before them, he was deeply dismayed that his fellow man had sunk so low as to equate and disguise so-called duty and responsibility to the treatment of prisoners that he had seen so far. His mind burned as he rebuked himself for taking this assignment at all, foolishly thinking he was going to visit a prison or a jail that had deserving criminals being held so as to protect outside society. Instead, he found helpless, innocent people incarcerated for all intents and purposes, could be described as criminals. Herr Loeb, did you hear me? Deeply lost in his own shame and thoughts, Gustav snapped to attention and answered, "Of course, sir, I will do my job quickly and satisfactorily, I promise." The commander, happy to have made his point, wished Gustav a good evening and left the visitor standing on the parade deck not far from the guest cottage. The young man attempted to light a cigarette, but his hands shook violently as he cupped the match. The air was chilly, but the shaking came as a result of realizing what he had gotten himself into. Looking at the ground, kicking the dirt and gravel in disgust, Gustav caught the motion of bodies running in the distance, in the area of the guard tower in front of him. Adjusting to the darkness, he watched as two human forms scurried towards the tower, spilling liquid at the base, and in seconds a match was applied, and the wooden structure was engulfed with fast-moving flames from the bottom to the top, and the frightened soldier on duty, screaming in fear. Gustav moved towards the frightened soldier, recognizing him as the young man who rejected the woman guard earlier. It was then he saw shadows running in the opposite direction, as he heard the distinctive laughing voices of the two women guards escaping back to the main camp buildings. Reaching the burning structure, he extolled the guard to jump the last 15 feet or so, screaming that a broken leg was preferable to burning to death. As the frightened man made his leap onto the hardened surface, he would have a long recovery to contemplate the truth to that statement. As the fire engulfed, the camp was awakened, and people came from everywhere to help extinguish the flames. Gustav dragged the young guard away from the danger area and was soon surrounded by what seemed to be the entire population of guards and clerical staff. In the outer circle, in the flickering light of the fire, he could make out the laughing face of Leda and the threatening scowl of Hildy as she made a cutting motion across her neck. The Swiss man understood that his life was in danger, and he needed to get the hell out of this place as soon as possible. Chapter 5. The camp was made up of 5 sections, each part with a different responsibility and overseeing purpose at Dachau. The medical department that was run by the camp physician was responsible for the medical care for the prisoners and the SS. In the administrative department, the duties included maintenance of the camp's equipment and facilities. It was in this area that Gustav would labor the next few days. Leda was part of the Protective Custody Division, a section that oversaw the prisoner complex and was dominated by the infamous SS Death Head Unit. These were a nasty lot who wore a special skull insignia on their collar, proud to separate themselves from other SS troops and embrace their brutal and ruthless identity. Next to the Leda's office was where her good friend and comrade Hildy worked. In this area of the camp, the political department was responsible for the registration of prisoners, interrogations, the camp prison, and the crematoria. The deranged woman guard earned her peculiar identity, be standing in the path of the smoke that billowed from the heated death chamber, dancing and shouting how the air smelled of victory as she murdered another batch of prisoners. Despite the wholesale wish to eliminate the Jews and support the final solution, the other guards, even the most vile of the skull emblazoned among them, recognized that Hildy wasn't to be trifled with, and all did their best to stay on her good side. Gustav, after a meager breakfast and a fitful sleep, unable to get the threatening image out of his mind, found himself walking towards the final section of the camp, the office of the commandant. He knew that Meyer would want to know what he saw the previous night, and he knew that if he told the truth, he could possibly never leave this hell on earth. Quietly cursing his ambition, the very drive that caused him to volunteer for this career-advancing opportunity, and swearing that he will be more careful in the future, Gustav walked into the reception area, just outside of Meyer's private office. Summoned into the inner office, the commandant appeared to be busy filing and signing paperwork, choosing to ignore his summoned visitor. In the corner of the office, 2 women prisoners were busy dusting the metal file cabinets and mopping the painted floor. Upon their departure, Meyer placed his pen on the desk and addressed his guest. "Do you know who those cleaning women were?" Meyer asked. "I have no idea. They are what is known as capos, inmates who work for us keeping the prisoners in line. I believe that their fellow prisoners are more afraid of them than they are of us." I am sure that they must fear at least a few of your people more than their fellow prisoners, no? Loeb's veiled reference to the female guard did not go unnoticed by the man behind the desk. Nodding his head in agreement, Meyer continued, "The capos report to me that there is a rumor that you know who burned my guard tower down last night. Is it possible that they are correct?" "Why would the prisoners report a rumor to you, sir, especially on such a recent event?" The senior officer removed his glasses and crossed his arms on the desk before him and spoke as if he had rehearsed his answer. "These prisoners work hard to gain favor with the staff and myself. You would be surprised at what they would do to remain in their position. They have little concern for their fellow prisoners and would sell any of them out to maintain their status quo. In short, I use them and their uncertain fear." Taking a harder line in his questioning, the officer leaned forward as if to show his increased urgency. "I know that you had a good view regarding what occurred. I expect to know the guilty party, as I am sure you can tell me." "Now who was it?" Nervously squirming in the steel office chair, the technician played many scenarios over in his mind while preparing for this inquisition. He ran into a dead end with every play, and the one that repulsed him the most was the truth. The officer was losing his patience. He was at the point of total frustration and recognized the predicament that the man on the opposite side of the desk was in. "I order you to tell me who burned my guard tower and hurt our soldier," Gustav blurted out, without thought or reason. "It was a child, sir." As soon as the words hurtled forward, he could tell that he was not the only person in the room stunned at this revelation. "A child? Are you simple?" Now fully committed to his lie, the young man went for broke. A boy, a very small child, black hair, curly, raggedy clothing, and barefoot. He came out of nowhere, poured fluid on the wooden tower, lit it before running off just minutes before everyone's arrival. Exhausted from his lying jag, Gustav wished for the whole event to be resolved and forgotten. Upon hearing the revelation coming from the mouth of the young man before him, the superior officer was stunned and simply waved Gustav from his presence and shook his head as he imagined his guest gone before actually leaving. Loeb, very glad to escape his inquiry, foolishly believing that his performance was satisfactory, he scurried to the administration building to begin his work repairing the punch card system that caused him to be in this awful place to begin with. At the end of the day, he was convinced that he could meet his work obligation with 2 extended days of effort. As darkness fell on this spring day, the repairman tiredly walked to his quarters in the fading part of daylight, hoping he would arrive before darkness, as the place made him uneasy in the daylight and increasingly terrifying in the darkness. As he approached his door, Gustav was delighted that he failed to run into any of the staff, including the boss that he lied to earlier, or the woman who threatened him last night, causing the aforementioned lie. As he opened the creaking door, Gustav had a premonition that he was not alone. He deliberately closed the portal and was terrified to hear a familiar voice speak in the darkness. Chapter 6. Leni had heard the rumors and was on the lookout for the capo designated for her area. She had promised Irma, the boy's mother, that she would hide and protect him as she was spirited off to daily work parties. The old woman was the social cushion between the fellow prisoners who lived to protect themselves with spying and trading in the currency of falsehoods and rumors. In that role, Leni would scavenge extra food and medicine as she cared for over 60 fellow prisoners, trying her best to lighten the unforgiving load placed on them daily by their unjust masters. The capo enemy reminded her of serpents, slithering quietly in search of news that would benefit them the most. The enemy that perturbed her the most was Dorothea Cohen, a despicable human being who managed to distinguish herself outwardly in a sea of despicable people, and now that enemy had come calling this dreary morning. "Greetings, Leni. I come bearing gifts, loaves of bread that I liberated from the camp bakery." Liberated is an interesting word to use in a place like this, Miss Dorothea. Leni had to watch what she said to this informal boss, as she rarely came to visit without a designated purpose. "How may I earn your gift of bread?" Without hesitation, the Jewish trader got directly to the point. "There is a boy somewhere in the camp, and he is suspected in the attempted murder of one of the guards. It is my duty to find him and turn him in." Leni was flabbergasted. The fact that anyone knew about Jacob was disturbing enough, but to believe that a comatose little boy could be an attempted murderer was especially hard to accept. Doing her best to not act surprised, the old woman gathered her thoughts and composure before answering. What makes you believe that there is a boy anywhere around here, and do you seriously believe that a youngster could be capable of trying to kill a soldier? Cohen was a clever person who enjoyed the perks of her position, and as Lenny spoke, every word was measured for truthfulness. I heard it said that a young boy was struck by a guard the other day, Hildegard Martha Lechert. Perhaps you know of her? I know she blasphemes my faith, wearing the Star of David as she proceeds to destroy my people. Lenny replied, You must mean our faith and our people, no? Cohen responded sweetly. Where you are concerned, with the position you have taken, it is difficult to believe that you and I are of the same anything, my dear Dorothea. Lenny did not try to disguise her contempt for the turncoat sitting in her presence. Cohen responded in a measured voice, something to the effect that one must do what one must do to survive, and some other excuses that Lenny was half listening to while planning her next move. I must leave. I have my duties to attend to, but I will return this evening and would appreciate an opportunity to speak to the boy's mother, Irma. Correct? Lenny ignored the question and asked one of her own. Do we have a choice, Fräulein? No, you do not, my Nimra. Cohen responded, satisfied that the prisoner knew her place. Both women turned from each other and headed toward their individual tasks at hand. The capo, determined to acquire more intel and return to search for the boy later that night, and the unofficial house mother, determined to stop anyone from finding the boy in question. Making sure that no one was watching, Lena sat and thought for a while, just to make sure that she was truly alone, and when she felt the time was right, she shuffled to the bunk where the injured boy was hidden. With anticipation, she removed the straw mattress and gently pulled the rough, textured blankets from his damaged face. The contusion on the side of his face was a deep purple, and his eyelid was black and blue. He murmured slightly as the old woman pursed his chapped lips with a moist cloth, wiping his fevered forehead as the mother in her caused her to stroke his damaged face. Speaking in a whisper, Lenny reassured herself in that moment. No, even if this boy was healthy, he could not do what they claim that he did. I must make plans for tonight's visit. I must be prepared. The mother to many burned inside as her own people chose to work with the monsters who are imprisoning and killing them. She found them to be sadistic and perverted, willing to do anything to keep their favored position in the hierarchy of the camp. As she continued with her duties, preparing for the later visit of her enemies, Lenny had a small smile on her face as she indeed did have surprise for those very enemies and was looking forward to that visit. Chapter 7. Even in a male-dominated military environment, Hildy knew how to intimidate others. As she waited in the darkness of Gustav Loeb's quarters, she perused through each of his personal possessions, jotting down the names of relatives and acquaintances along with their personal information. This little man irritated her for some reason, whether it was his civilized demeanor, natural reserved nature, or his ability to leave Dachau in a matter of only days. She saw him as a weakling, easily dominated. As she dug through his clothing located in his suitcase, the female guard graded each item in value from a personal theft standpoint. Taking things from others gave her a reason to live. In the mind of a twisted person, the rules that polite society followed did not exist in the concentration camp world. She was allowed to beat, strangle, drown, shoot, or set aflame a prisoner without concern for law or legal discipline. She was allowed to execute a prisoner on the spot for being suspected of wanting to escape or espoused a contrary political view. And the best part was that the prisoners had no right to defend themselves or protest any treatment by the likes of her. As she sat with dirty and muddy boots on the bed of her Swiss prey, Hildy really could not believe her good fortune. Her job suited her perfectly. For a further display of control and arrogance, she flicked ashes from her burning cigarette on the floor. Slowly opening the door, Gustav caught the smell of a smoke. Puzzled by this odor, he proceeded into the darkened room with his sense of smell aligned with his sense of fear as he heard the familiar voice. "It is about time that you arrived home, my little Jew boy. Have you missed me?" The young man was stuck between anger and fear. The anger caused him to close and lock the door, and fear told him to proceed carefully. "What are you doing in my room?" As he spoke, his eyes adjusted as the guard slid her muddy boots off of the cot and moved within inches of his face. "You own nothing here, your life included. You may think that you have value to someone here, but you are just a glorified fix-it man who will leave soon, if you are lucky." Gustav chose to remain calm, clinging to civilization's promises while denying his present reality. "I am a Swiss citizen. I have rights." Circling her victim, the intense woman seemed amused by his answer. "Swiss man, you have no rights here in my world. You do understand that, no? What do you want?" "You know what I want. I want to know what you told my commander." Gustav felt a surge of bravery. Where it came from, he did not know, but it dissipated as the words came from his mouth. "I told him that the little boy did it." Seeing the genuine quizzical look on his tormentor's face, he continued. The boy that you struck down on the parade deck as his mother tried to defend him. That boy!" Hildy threw her head back in laughter, pointing at Gustav as she mocked him, speaking between guffaws. "He believed you? Meyer believed you?" The besieged man was honest in his response. "I'm not sure, but what difference does it make? I didn't tell him it was you." "That's what you wanted, right?" Not really sure what she was going to say next, the laughing guard sat back on the bed, obviously enjoying the situation that she created. "It is good that you didn't tell him it was me, because I would kill you and throw your remains on my nightly burn heap." The image of this woman loading his lifeless body onto the pile of other unfortunates in the crematorium was distressing. He cursed his situation and the woman threatening him. "Why did you do that anyway?" he asked. Hildy was silent before answering, and when she did, it was in a disgusted voice. "He rejected me. No one rejects me. He is lucky that he only has a broken leg and that there was a crowd around him. I would have sliced his throat and let him bleed where he lay." If Gustav was worried before, he now was in a state of panic as this psychopath who stood before him meant serious business. "Your explanation is weak, and my commander will see through it. I am afraid that you will not be allowed to leave Dachau under your own effort. And yes, I am afraid you will have a bad accident in the next day or two." "What if I went and told the truth, since you have threatened to kill me anyway? What if I did that?" Gustav had real desperation in his voice, and the evil woman enjoyed when her victims' voices hit that special note. "I have all of the addresses of your family members, for you see, I used my waiting time for you wisely. Not only will I kill you, but I will eventually be free to kill all of them too. So go ahead and tell the truth." With this final salvo of words, Hildy opened the door and turned to face her victim before leaving. "See you at supper, Gustav." As he watched the door close, he knew that something must be done, and soon, or he would never see home again. Chapter 8. Leni met Irma as the younger woman returned from her shift of slave labor at the nearby armament factory. All of the women returning were greeted by the old woman, as each deposited an almost indistinguishable amount of gunpowder, as they had done faithfully for several months now, out of the creases in their garments, into a cup that was deposited into a larger bucket, well hidden from the guards. The old woman took the mother of the wounded boy aside to fill her on the recent threats that were made. Before they could complete their discussion, word came from the other prisoners. Leni's nemesis, Dorothea Cohen, was sighted close by. Capo, capo, the early warning system of prisoners alerting their leader that the enemy was approaching, and Leni smiled knowingly as she walked with Irma, fully willing to confront. As Dorothea approached with two fellow informal lieutenants, she attempted to stride in such a way as to exude power, hoping to measure the amount of will to resist and imbibe a lack of hope and resistance. In the case of Leni and Irma, the self-important capo was to be surely disappointed. The two women had a plan, and despite being frail, hungry, and apparently at the mercy of these fellow Jewish prisoners that turned against their people and their faith, they would accomplish much if fate, timing, and providence allowed. Leni spoke first, asking Cohen to follow her, as she had something to show her. With the confidence of a person surely in charge of the situation, the woman felt assured that even these fools would do nothing to harm her. Assuming her safety, she dismissed her subordinates and followed as requested. "Will you be revealing where the boy is hidden?" I do not have much time for delays. Irma was silent, and Leni responded in a voice that had the tone of subservience in every word. Yes, Fräulein, we realize that your time is valuable. Irma and I will show you the boy as we wish to end this unfortunate situation also. A little taken aback by the Fräulein designation, Dorothea was happy that the prisoners knew their place as she followed the women to the back of the barracks area. Where is this boy? Is it correct that he is your son, Irma? Irma nodded affirmatively, remaining calm and silent. The unofficial prisoner superior felt confident to be a little more in control. It is too bad, Irma. Your boy must be formally incarcerated, and I am afraid that his future is rather dim, if I may be honest. For now, I will spare your lives despite your illegal activities against the authorities. Irma could not remain silent any longer. Yes, ma'am, the future is indeed dim. With the words fresh out of her mouth, Irma swung a shovel and knocked the pot to the ground, and Lena bound her hands with wire and shoved a dirty cloth into her mouth. Dorothea Cohn awoke with a start, felt the warmth of her blood cascading down the right side of her face and the swelling of her bottom lip. She was confused as to why she was sitting on the ledge of the building. Without her glasses, she could not really see just how high up she was, but she did feel that her position was precarious. Leni spoke in a measured voice to her captive turncoat fellow prisoner. How long have you been a work supervisor? Dorothea felt her physical position was tenuous, and that balance was critical at the present moment. She was glad when the filthy rag was pulled from her mouth. Where are we? What am I in such an unsafe position? I cannot look down. Is this a rope around my neck? That is a lot of questions. Answer mine first, and I may answer yours. Leni responded in a voice that had been hidden for some time. You know how long I have been in charge? You and I were brought to this camp together. Remember, my friend? Leni's voice revealed real anguish, as she did have a long history with the evil woman tottering on a very tall wooden partition with a rope around her neck, indeed. I do remember that, my friend. I remember that you revealed each and every secret that we held in our hearts, your friends and my friends, all dead because of you and your kind. You are despicable. After collecting her emotions, she strove to remember each detail that she had rehearsed. The people who were scooped up by these vermin in fancy uniforms, who gathered us like sheep, starved us and worked us to death, and then only to have our earthly bodies burned to a crisp and dumped into a common grave, you ingratiated yourself to our enemy and became their servant, forgoing goodness and embracing evil. I and the others despise you and your kind. Realizing that no one could hear her scream, and understanding that she was about to die and have her own body thrown in with the rest, Dorothea chose to be belligerent and cursed to two women below her. Leni listened to the old woman spew hatred until she was silent with exhaustion. When her victim started being remorseful and weeping, showing fake sorrow, she told her of her final fate. You wished to solve the mystery of the boy, and now you will further expand that very mystery. With those words, the last act of the old woman was to start to ask a clarifying question, and the last thing she felt was the piece of timber in her back as Irma pushed her from her unsteady perch, allowing her a long and torturous death by strangulation. Both of the women stood below and watched the life ooze from the grotesque death mask, and when the shaking body gave up, a note was attached just above the feet. On the note, written in a child's hand, it simply said, I may be a child, but I will remain victorious. Chapter 9. Commandant Meyer was puzzled as he heard the news of the late work supervisor. She was an insufferable woman, filled with false subservience. Losing her wasn't an issue. He wanted to kill her himself several times. No, what perturbed him most was the ridiculous rumor of a child who didn't exist physically was somehow murdering his staff and burning down the very property that he was responsible for. None of this made sense to him, and he knew that his superiors would not be amused. The torrent of abuse that rained down upon the prisoners was excessive, even according to the daily realities that were of Dachau. All prisoners were assembled on the grinder deck, forced to stand at attention in their ill-fitting wooden shoes, in the light rain and freezing breeze. The female guard that they hated the most was present to help bring the general punishment down upon the heads of the exhausted and emaciated group of prisoners. As Hildy passed before each and every prisoner, She waved the ornament around her neck in their face, mocking them and their faith, painting a picture of defeat and hopelessness. The faces that looked back were without words, but their hearts were filled with anger towards their tormentor. They, as a group, would welcome the punishment for the murder of the stooge Capo, and looked forward to their god dealing justice onto the psychopathic guard in front of them now, and the rest of the demons who scurried to complete the will of their evil masters. Hildy and the other guards were given the task of destroying the quarters of the prisoners and the recovery of all contraband, of which none was found. Leni was nervous as the prisoner living area was torn apart. As sad as it was to see, she was very glad that the accumulated gunpowder was in a very secure place. Gustav heard the rumor as he ate his meager breakfast, and was distraught to hear that the rumor of the boy being blamed for the death of the capo. He looked around the room as he ate his meal, hoping that he could be finished before the crazy guard could find him. As he shoveled scrambled eggs and biscuit into his mouth, he looked to the door behind him, sipped some tea, and felt a large and looming shadow over him. Afraid to look up, he was relieved to see the somewhat friendly face of Fritz. "Enjoying our famous German cuisine, no? I've never eaten eggs like these before. What makes them different?" Gustav asked. "They are powdered eggs, courtesy of the Red Cross. The jam and biscuits, too. The Red Cross sends food to feed guards at this camp." Fritz smiled, as if he was about to say something clever. "It is true that the Red Cross sends it to us, but it is intended for the prisoners. Much like your favorite drink that you confiscate from the Russian prisoners?" The German raised his palms as if to indicate it was beyond his control. As the young Swiss man finished eating, guilt overcame him for the umpteenth time as he participated in this moral nightmare. He was glad when Fritz changed the subject. "So, how are you coming with the machine repairs? We good to start counting soon?" Gustav placed his fork down as his appetite was surely spent by now. "Fritz, do you have any idea what the punch card system does exactly?" "No, not really. It is a binary formatted system where each hole represents a digit or bit, and every column is what is known as a bit field. For example, everything about the prisoners that you hold here, their age, name, sex, religion, and geographic background are encoded and used to capture and exterminate them. Doesn't that bother you?" Fritz thought for a moment and answered in the negative. "No, it does not bother me. I am curious. Why not?" Gustav asked. "Because since I was a child, I have been told that the Jew was my enemy. They undermined us in the last war, helped to design a costly treaty that crippled Germany and the Thysenstadt, have control over our money and communications. What of the gypsies, Russians, homosexuals, and the other religious groups? They are not Jewish, but they are killed and burned, no?" The young man felt his voice rise and worked to control the volume as he watched the face of the man in front of him register concern. Fritz did not seem to show any emotion as Gustav laid out his case. "Those are all weak people, dirty people, all who should be removed from German society. For the record, we do not kill them. They die of natural causes, and then we burn them." Gustav was stunned. Here was this friendly man who had been congenial and hospitable to him as a visitor, but was totally in denial as to what was happening around him. "Fritz, these people that are stacked like cord wood in that crematorium in the back of this place did not die of natural causes. They were worked to death in manufacturing plants, in the fields, not getting enough nutrition and dying of illnesses that they would not normally die from. They are scooped from their filthy beds every morning at death's door or beyond it. That's what the repairs to the machines do. Keep account of the dead, your feeble enemies." Both men observed a silent spell before the guard spoke. "You must come to terms with this. You must hide away your feelings and beliefs here, if you don't want to be one of those bodies stacked in that building. Good luck in completing your job satisfactorily, young man." As he stood to leave, he did get closer for the young man to hear him speak. "If I were you, I would speed up my work schedule. I believe that it is possible that there are those among us who do not want you to leave. Goodbye, my friend." Gustav did not need any further explanation as to who might want to do him harm. He asked Fritz where Hildy was this morning, and was told that she was on duty in the barracks area most of the day. Relieved, the punch card repairman headed directly to his assigned work area, determined to have everything accomplished today. As he walked, he saw a macabre scene outside of the incinerator house, as the bodies of spent prisoners were piled outside, scheduled for cremation that night. Again, he admonished himself for his faulty career ambition. Chapter 10. Gustav found that the biggest problem to the machines he was assigned to repair was unauthorized lace cards that lacked structural strength and frequently buckled and jammed inside the machine. After he replaced them with the OEM cards that he brought with him, the problems were eliminated. After finishing his repairs, the young man reported to Commandant Meyer that his task was complete. The superior officer asked him to take a seat as he had a few questions. Gustav nervously complied, sitting opposite across the desk. Meyer shuffled some papers before speaking. "Have you heard about the murder of one of the prisoners yesterday?" Gustav almost laughed out loud after hearing the commandant mention one murder of a prisoner when there were over 50 bodies, stacked naked to the world, ready to be incinerated later. "I did hear that a capo had been found dead, but that was all." "You did not hear that she was murdered by a boy, much like the boy you supposedly saw burn down my guard tower?" Meyer asked. "No, sir, I did not." Gustav was having a hard time controlling his vocal octaves, as he found his voice would go up dramatically when under pressure, something that happened more since his arrival at Dachau than for his whole previous life for sure. "What makes you think that a boy did it?" "Let us just say that there was a note left on the body, and leave it at that," Meyer responded in a skeptical voice. "Almost from the minute you have arrived at my camp, strange things have happened, and I blame you. Since your work is complete, I will have you escorted to the train station in the morning. Until then, behave yourself and do not cause any more trouble." Gustav was almost numb as he arose from the chair. He was stunned that he was being blamed for all that had happened, and he still had to deal with the sadistic pyromaniac who has threatened to make sure that he does not leave Dachau in one piece. With the great sense of being alone in this strange world that seemed to stand for all of the worst traits found in man himself, Gustav decided to eat supper in the mess and then lock himself in for the night before his departure in the morning. With any luck at all, he could avoid any more contact with the other denizens of Dachau. The hall was quiet, and he was happy in the thought that he could eat in peace. The menu hadn't changed, leading him to believe that the latest Red Cross delivery must be delayed. Polishing off a meal of sausage and biscuits, he filled his tin cup with hot water and looked forward to a cup of tea in his room as he packed his bags for home. Upon arriving at his room, the recent memory of the insane woman guard caused him to move carefully, making sure that he was alone. Moving deliberately and suspiciously, peeking and peering into the darkened room, he allowed his eyes to adjust to the limited light, gingerly afforded by the small candle next to the bed. With the electricity and intermittent luxury, Gustav learned almost at once upon his arrival that he must be prepared. Packing to leave will be a challenge in the dark, but the thoughts of escape from this hellhole made the task less daunting. He felt for the handle of his suitcase underneath the bed and noticed that it felt empty. A true realization of that occurred when he opened it. Inside, where his clothing and travel papers had been just hours ago, was a note that simply said, "Look out your window." With a new level of anxiety rising upward in his chest, Gustav pulled the curtain back and was dumbstruck to see Crazy Hildy standing over his possessions with a lighted match. Holding his travel papers over her head as she shouted, "Little Jew boy, were you planning to leave without wishing me farewell? You won't get far without your paperwork, will you?" The young man was beside himself with the thought of having his possessions burned, and most of all, his travel papers. He was at that moment unsure what he would do, and if this were to happen, based on his last meeting with the commandant, he was pretty sure he would receive no sympathy or help. In total desperation, he appealed to Hildy. "Please, do not burn my things. What do you want from me?" he shouted. Hildy knew that she had her prey trapped, and she also knew that her plan of torment was just beginning. "Meet me at the smokehouse in 15 minutes. With that, she lit the paper kindling below the clothing and pictures and began to run with the travel papers over her head. Gustav threw his arms up as he saw his travel belongings burning furiously. He hurried through the door to try and save what he could. Arriving at the burning pile, he kicked the destroyed clothing and family pictures and found no remnants of his important papers. Going back to his room to extinguish the candle, the young man was eerily quiet and acted as though he were a man on a mission, which he surely was. He knew that smokehouse was a disgusting euphemism for the crematorium, where Hildy was on duty tonight. He approached quietly, and from the opposite direction of the crematorium office, and with as much stealth that he could muster, he opened the door quickly so as to surprise his tormentor. "Looking for me, darling!" He turned quickly and saw the grotesque silhouette of the female guard. "Give me my papers, and I will not report you to the commandant." Hildy lived for moments like this, and Gustav not so much. "You went to see my boss again today. Maybe to tell him more lies about me, no?" Gustav sighed. He was getting very sick of dealing with Nazis. "No, I told him nothing more than what I told him the first time. He didn't mention you at all," Gustav implored. Hildy toyed with her prey. "He didn't ask about the prisoner that was hung in the barracks?" Still focused on the previous burning guard tower incident, he forgot about the other murderous event. "Yes, the capo. I didn't know that she was hung. I just know that she was killed. He said it was a little boy. Do you not find that peculiar, Jew boy? 2 incidences and 2 sightings of a ghost boy in both of them. What is your point? I did not reveal you in the incident where you tried to burn down the guard tower. I have done everything you wanted, but you continue to harass me, and quit calling me Jew boy. I have told you that I am not a Jew." Inside, he was thinking how much he hated the person in front of him as she stood waving his papers like a fan. "Come, follow me. I wish to give you the full Dachau experience before you leave us." Gustav knew that the rear area of the building was the execution area where Gestapo prisoners, Soviet prisoners, and other inmates that refused to die fast enough. He knew that he could be set up to join the tens of thousands that walked the final steps before shuttling off their mortal coil. As he followed the evil woman, he came in view of the stack of corpses that were prepared to be cremated on Hildy's work shift. Grotesque was an inadequate description to be used for this sight. The faces of the young and old were contorted and disfigured from pain and suffering. It was the woman's voice that caused him to look away. "Come, I wish to show you something." Sorrowful and emotional, the young man who truly wished he would have stayed home and led another technician to partake in the moment of hell, stumbled forward, hoping this would all end soon. "What is it you want me to see?" he asked suspiciously. The boy you saved the other day, you recognize him?" Hildy was truly enjoying herself at this point of the tour. "We found him. He was hidden below a prisoner's bunk. He was already dead. Too bad for me, as I would have liked to have smashed in the other side of his head." The old one next to him was the capo that was hung supposedly by this boy. Turning on her heel, prominently wearing the gold Star of David war trophy around her neck, she waved her hand over the naked body of the boy and the old woman. "Can you tell me how this boy who was almost dead managed to kill this old hag?" "I don't understand. I never said that the boy killed the capo. I only said the boy burned the guard tower. I think you are crazy." Gustav almost shouted. As he spoke, the odor of death that permeated the crematorium entered his nose and throat, restricting his ability to speak. He had heard that the 4 ovens ran night and day, and judging from the information he was privy to in the administration office, if you were running the crematoria at Dachau, you had job security for the near future. The guard watched the young man's reaction to the reality of the crematorium, saw that he was deeply affected by the human beings stacked and ready for destruction. She could not relate at all, as the scene brought her nothing but happiness, as she watched her enemy destroyed. Guarding the door with her victim emotionally disabled and standing 15 feet inside the guarded door, Hildy passed judgment. "Jew boy, I believe that you are working for these prisoner vermin. You are a spy, and since you like being with them in life, so shall you be with them in death." With those words, Gustav watched as the guard made a move towards the door, as she prepared to lock him in and burn him with the bodies that filled the room. Gustav had no idea he could cover ground that quick, and as she underestimated his speed and his strength, the young man had built up a powerhouse of energy and anger at his tormentor. He grabbed her arm and slammed the heavy door on her elbow, grinning as she cried out in pain. Gustav then grabbed the enemy by the hair and slammed her face into a large water pipe, causing blood to spatter along the wall, and he felt her slump forward unconsciously. Not knowing if she was alive or dead, he stripped her of her clothing and placed her unconscious body on top of the boy and the capo. Not sure how much time that he had left before the oven would start, he gathered his papers from the floor and stuffed the uniform beneath her body, and on the way out the door he landed a crushing blow to the side of her face in honor of the deceased boy laying below her. Moving like his life depended on it, mainly because it did, Gustav latched the door, placing all of the locks in place so that no one would hear Hildy even if she did wake up. He did not feel good about his actions, but he didn't feel remorseful either. Moving through the darkness, travel papers in hand, Gustav arrived at his room without incident. He tried to sleep but was haunted by his recent memories and wished that the morning light would hurry itself. After an hour of restless thought, he heard the enormous explosion. Looking out of the window, he saw the large flame glow in the distinct direction of the crematorium. After watching the fire brigade and emergency crew activate, Gustav felt that the mayhem and confusion would be a good cover to find out what happened. As he approached the former structure, it was difficult to recognize the place he was at just a short while ago. Nothing was recognizable at all, just a burning heap. As he started to leave without answers, he noticed a familiar face. Fritz saw him at the same time and walked toward him. "What happened, Fritz? Is everyone okay?" "They do not know. Last we heard was that Hildy was absent from her post. Nothing that unusual, as you know she is an acquired taste. It looks like 3 of our men were killed and no one can find her. I wouldn't want to be Hildy when the boss gets hold of her." "That's too bad, Fritz. I'm glad that you are okay and I'm sure your friend will show up." Gustav offered, "Make one thing clear, Hildy is not my friend. She is nobody's friend, sir. If she is gone, no one will miss her." With these final words, Gustav and Fritz parted ways and both went back to their quarters. Around 2 hours later, the young man from Switzerland nodded off, only to be startled by a knock on his door. As he opened it, he saw a familiar face. It was the mother of the boy that he saw being struck when he arrived. His eyes dropped in shame as he realized just how impotent he was in all of this mess. The woman spoke in a quiet voice. "I am the new capo. I have replaced the one who was killed recently. I have been instructed to wake you so that you will not miss your train. I am sorry for your loss." The woman's eyes darted upward. "For what, sir? What loss do you speak of?" Irma asked quietly. "Please, wait one moment. I have something for you." Gustav asked. The young man returned and placed a gold Star of David in the palm of her hand. "For the loss of your son." Gustav closed her hand around the gold piece and smiled. The mother trembled and in normal circumstances would have broken down, but the item in her hand answered an important question regarding justice for her young son. "You were there, weren't you?" Gustav shook his head affirmatively and reached out to cup her hands so as to comfort the poor woman in pain. "Did you serve justice to that animal?" the mother asked. "I did, ma'am. No one will ever find her, I promise," the young man assured her. "Would you like to know how the crematorium got destroyed?" she asked. "I'm not sure. Will it put you in danger if you tell me?" Gustav was genuinely concerned. "It may, but they will find out eventually and hang us," she answered almost nonchalantly. "In that case, go ahead." Looking around so as to make sure what she said was private, she went on. "We filled that old capo's stomach full of gunpowder and hung her back up. Make sure you don't miss your train. Thank you, and be blessed." With that, Gustav gathered his paperwork and rode to the train station. As he sank into the cushioned seat on the train, the young man pondered deeply on how you could possibly fill the stomach of a dead person with enough gunpowder to blow up a building. All he knew was that the evil that truly was Dachau deserved to be destroyed entirely.
Thank you for listening today. Please consider sharing, liking, and commenting below. It helps us get the word out and create more books.